So just amazing. Yeah, I used to live there too. Yeah, I used to live there too. But I want to go to my guests. We are joined with KJ No, great friend of the show. He's a journalist, political analyst, writer, and teacher specializing in the geopolitics of the Asia Pacific region. KJ, my man, how you doing, man? You doing okay today?
I'm doing well. Good to see you.
Good to see you too, man. I brought you on because of this kind of thing about Deepseek. I was fascinated about this. So OpenAI has their chat GPT and everything else. And this was this kind of AI hopium that was going to be out, this kind of new revolution of AI. And the belief is, okay, this is going to take $100 million. It's going to take a massive amount of money, time, engineering, etc. Then China comes in, spends $10 million, and comes up with a pretty decent. See, it's slightly different because I was looking at shows on this yesterday, trying to explain how this process works, and they point out that this is momentous in general, and they describe it kind of like a Sputnik moment, where you have this kind of new piece of technology that blows the other pieces out the water, not necessarily because it's functionally better, but because they've been able to do it, but cheaper. And they described it kind of like the difference between a mainframe and a laptop. It seems, and correct me if I'm wrong, that they trained Deepseek on some of the other more expensive larger language models. And based on the training, has been able to come up with answers that are just as good as the answers that are coming from, let's say, the other larger language models that they were effectively being trained on, basically coming up with semblance of an answer for much, much cheaper of a price. Now, I've seen some of the research on this showing that there's hallucinations and everything else, but that's almost secondary to the point. The fact that it's open source, the fact that it has been able to keep up with the big boys for a fraction of the price. They described it, the difference between like a mainframe and a laptop. It's like, yeah, you have mainframes that people are using at these companies and everything else, but most people could get by with a laptop. And if you can have something like a DeepSeek or something similar to a DeepSeek on the various computers, then you can put this kind of high power system into the hands of all of these businesses and all of these people for whatever particular reason they want to use it for. It makes AI to be something that is universally used. And since it's open source, you can effectively see what's going on behind the scenes. Give me a take on this. I was fascinated by this, especially with $1 trillion of market share going up in smoke over the course of like 2 days.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Some people have said that it is a $1 trillion wake-up call. And if I'm not mistaken, NVIDIA, which manufactures the graphics processing units, the chips that they use for AI, lost at one point 580, almost $600 billion, 17% of its valuation. So it really is a game changer.
And by the way, the reason it lost that money is because people realize, wait a minute, they've been able to do this without using NVIDIA chips. Basically, they were able to get something that worked similar without using the technology that the people were saying was necessary in order to do it.
Yeah, no, there's a very, very interesting lesson there, which I will get to. But, just to go back to the numbers, according to their information, they said that they were able to train DeepSeek for the cost of $5.6 million. ChatGPT-4 cost $100 million to train. And we don't know, we're not sure, but we think that ChatGPT-5 cost $1 billion. So you're looking at orders of magnitude of savings, which is incredible, which is essentially just blows the entire business model out of the water, because it tells you that huge moat that they created to kind of guard their proprietary information is simply a moat built by hype, greed, and complacency. And DeepSeek has just blown that out of the water, and they put everything that they have done out in the public as open source. And so this is really transforming the nature of the AI industry. Before, AI was something that only rich countries and rich corporations with multi-billion-dollar, multi-hundreds of billion-dollar valuations could even get in the game of. In fact, I think Sam Altman actually said, to the Indians, don't even try it. It's impossible. You want to do it for 10 million? You cannot do this. And ChatGPT has just done it for 5.6 million. Kai-Fu Lee had said even before that they could do something comparable for about 3 million. And most recently, this is news out of a research team at UC Berkeley, they did a scaled down version of the tech for $30.
Really?
Yes, I just sent you that link. You can read the entire, the article. But what this shows is that the Chinese have democratized AI by putting it out as open source and then giving us multiple distilled versions that can run on very, very simple platforms. It means that anybody in the global south who has a laptop or even a phone can use some distilled version of Deepseek without even having an internet connection. And then they can start to use AI for whatever they need. So it is an incredible democratization of the technology. And if we think of AI as a war, as people like Eric Schmidt have framed it, they see it as the great war, the great tech war. DeepSeek is like the AK-47. It's like the Kalashnikov. It equalizes. You have the great imperial powers with their massive armies, and then you have the rebel fighters fighting for liberation, and they have something which is simple, sturdy, reliable, but it equalizes the odds. And it's like the Kalashnikov of the AI wars, if you will. And so I think it really is revolutionary.
No, I agree with you. No, please continue. No, I was just saying I agree with you. Keep going.
Now you asked about how they did it, and you can read the paper. People are bloviating without reading any of the papers. These guys published some really, really solid documentation and analysis. It's all in the public, not just the code, but how they did it. They explain it all, and they show they used mix of experts. They reduced it from a 32-bit floating point number to an 8-bit floating number. They used reinforced learning, which means that they didn't have to have these they didn't have to have these large data sets that were pre-labeled, and it's a kind of like DeepMind, this kind of continuous reinforcement learning. So these are all brilliant innovations, and you look at them. You look at the team. They're young, fresh-faced students. They look like a team of college researchers.
Yeah.
And the picture I saw, half of them were young women.
Yep.
And it's just, you can see the kind of energy and the creativity in their eyes. But what the US was planning to do was they were planning to shut China's AI development out completely. They put sanctions on the chips, they put sanctions on the tech. They called it, a 4-point chokehold, which was designed to kill China's technology. And certainly they were going to prevent China from developing AI, which they consider to be the technological, frontier and the most important technology for control of the world, of the future. And these guys just kind of, just flipped it on its head. But I'll give you a little analogy. There's a writer called Jeanette Winterson, really, really brilliant writer. When she was growing up, she grew up in a fundamentalist household, and she was not allowed to have any books. The only book that she was allowed to read was the Bible. And her, parents or her mother was this crazy fundamentalist that, if you had a book that was not the Bible, you were bringing the devil into the house. And so what she did was she would sneak books into her house, and then she would read them and she would stick them under her mattress. And then pretty soon her mattress got higher and higher until it was like 4 inches higher above, where it was. And then one day she came home and she noticed that her mother had discovered her book cache and was throwing all the books out of the window and burnt all of them. And, this analogy is getting too long, but the US is like that fundamentalist, crazy mother, who wants to deprive this person of books. What did Jeanette Winterson do? She just wrote her own books. And she's one of the most brilliant creative writers of her generation. And all of this is a roundabout way of saying that, if you create those kinds of constrictions, people are just going to become more creative, which is exactly what Deepseek did. They took a small team of, PhD students and researchers, and then they just applied incredible creativity to the process. And they're doing what OpenAI or others did for 1/11th, 100th, maybe 1/1000th of the cost. And it just goes to show you that, it's trite. Necessity is the mother of invention. But, it's incredible what they did. So
it's astonishing. And I love this analogy of this idea of a mainframe versus a computer, because the guy who was kind of going to this explanation, he was a tech channel. He was going into like the mechanics of it, how it works. And he downloaded it himself. He was messing with it, playing with it himself. And he was pointing out, he was like, you don't even need these kind of high-end computers in order to run Deepseek. You can run it on basic computers. Like even somebody with just a basic laptop at home will be able to run it. Small businesses will be able to run it. And I think he was trying to make this analogy with this idea of, in the same way that most companies wouldn't be able to afford a mainframe, but they could afford a computer, that Deepseek may fit that niche of allowing, like you said, democratization of AI in a way that would not have been the case before. Like, the amount of money that it would have cost to get for a company to get whatever Altman came up with, or whatever some of these major companies came out with, they would have charged through the nose, especially if they were going to be the only place where you could have gotten it from.
They have now. They've been charging $200 for the same thing that you can get from Deepseek for nothing.
Wow. Just think of how much money they have lost in this process. So I guess the question becomes, now what? Now that all of the funding sources have drained up, or at the very least a huge amount of the money has been drained out in regards to their stock options. So what do they have to do? They have to build this now on the cheap, meaning OpenAI. Like what? I got to be honest, I haven't read into what they are going to do. I was reading more so into DeepSeek. But I guess that begs the question of, okay, now that they've made proof of concept that something like that could be done cheaper, significantly cheaper, like radically cheaper, and get somewhat of a similar product, what does it mean for OpenAI? And what does it mean for these kind of other products coming out of the US that are bloated? And I don't want to say bloated, because for all intents and purposes, DeepSeek was trained on these kind of large models. It's just that they've been able to get a really good approximation of those models much cheaper without the NVIDIA chips and everything else, which, if you're an investor, you look at that and you say, wait a minute, they built that for $10 million and they didn't even have these kind of super NVIDIA chips and they were still able to get an approximation of it. Well, you can imagine, you may feel some kind of way about that if you invested a huge amount of money into it and your first thought is the Chinese are going to take over. I mean, this kind of puts you in the mind of the EV market, right? Where the US is like, well, we can't allow EVs from China into the United States. If so, the game is over. They can build a better product than Tesla and they can build it for cheaper. We can't compete. It's the same thing now true for AI, especially on this kind of, let's say, mid-level scale of the AI system?
It's a system-wide issue. It's actually across all sectors. There's a think tank called ASPI. It's a very hawkish anti-China think tank from Australia, Australian Strategic Policy Institute. And they have estimated of 64 critical technologies, 64 cutting edge critical technologies, quantum computers, etc. The Chinese lead in 57 out of 64 of these critical technologies.
Wow.
So it's way ahead of the United States. The US used to lead in almost all of these technologies 2 decades ago. Now China is leading in almost all of them. US only has, still has the edge in 7 of them, but China is catching up closely. So, it is paradigm shifting. But what it does is it puts the lie to this canard that the Chinese cannot innovate, that they're not creative. The thing is, and once again, people don't understand this. China has been building up this capacity for decades. Didn't just come out of nowhere. How did it do this? What it did was it started educating people and created mass literacy. And then it started improving education at the lower levels and just continually built up. And now it has the best research graduate institutions in the planet. If you look at a list of the top 20 research institutions doing, top-notch science and technology, about 3/4 of them are Chinese. Okay, and this contrasts with, for example, you can think of India. India started out from the same place, formerly colonized, incredibly poor, large population, impoverished. India's policy of education was to put its focus on elite educational institutions. So they have some really top-notch, technology institutes, and these people put out, great engineers, great scientists. But the Chinese didn't do that. What they did was they just brought everybody up. They started with making sure that everybody had really good basic education. And then you go to the next step and the next step and the next step. And then you realize how that builds incredible infrastructure of, intellectual capacity that if they want to, they can apply that at any single moment on any single topic. And they're going to have extraordinary results. If you doubt that, pick up, a Chinese middle school math textbook and see how many of those problems you can solve. You can see they're making those kids study really, really hard. And they're really, trained from a very young age to figure things out, to solve problems, to be creative. And so it's a completely different paradigm, but it, really shifts. Now, the other thing that I'll point out is your question. What are the countermeasures, or how is, OpenAI and Meta and how these guys going to respond?
Right.
There is how they should respond, which is they should open up their stuff, right? They should
they're not going to do that.
open source too. And instead of coping, they should start coding, right? Less cope, more code. They could do what the Chinese, what Deepseek has done, which is start to apply themselves to doing some really good analysis and creating some real code. But I don't think that's what they're going to do. And the early signals show that they're essentially attacking China. And when I say attack, Deepseek has already gone down several times with these massive DDoS attacks, right?
Yeah.
They've been tagging the service, taking it down repeatedly. And so, I don't know who's behind it, but you can certainly you can certainly think about who's benefiting from that. And then, of course, they're attacking it through propaganda. They're saying, Deepseek stole everything from us. Well, if they stole everything, show the receipts, show us what you did so that we can actually compare, what it was you did before. And they say, oh, we haven't published anything, but they stole the stuff that we had already thought about. Come on, that's really...
It's open source. It's open source. Like, you can literally look at
You
It's
can look
open
at it.
source.
Yes,
Yeah,
you can
these are
look at
sour
what
grapes.
you can look at what they did, and it also kind of begs the other issue, which is that OpenAI stole everything from the internet. They scraped everything off of the internet. They literally stole everything off the internet, and so even if you think that there's no proof of this, but even if you think that everything that Deepseek did was stolen from OpenAI, the only thing that OpenAI did was return it back to the commons, return it back to the people. These guys are the Robin Hood of AI, you know.
Yeah.
So I think there's a profound shift, and what it really is. People say, "Oh, this is China versus the U.S." No, it's open source versus closed source. It's people who want to share knowledge with other people, who want to bring everything out into the light, into the open, into the commons, and those who want to privatize it and turn it into, a kind of, private property that they
Oh,
can
man.
greedmonger and gouge people over.
This is fascinating because it's an ideological argument at its very bare bones, at its very basic level. It's an ideological conversation that's taking place, communists versus capitalists, in the way that they effectively operate, not just for AI, in a way that you pointed out, they democratize artificial intelligence, but even on the means by which to get artificial intelligence. For example, because as you were recounting what China was doing in the context of school, I started thinking of the US. And one of the arguments I always make is that you shouldn't, we have an intellectual arms race taking place across the globe, especially the more sophisticated our world gets technologically or scientifically. The more brains, the more people you need to be able to be technologically and scientifically sophisticated to be able to understand a more complicated world. All right. What is better? To create bar on entry to that, where you're going to say you need to give me $50,000 if you want a high school or if you want a college education, or do you make it free? And as opposed to saying the capitalist point of view, how can we maximize our profit? We have people who want a future, and because those people want a future, those people are going to be willing to pay us out the nose. They're going to go into debt over the course of 20 years in order to get a future where they're not necessarily poor, where they have a better chance of success in life. As opposed to, it is in our best interest as a country for people, anybody who wants to go to school, to be able to do so and do it without this kind of $50,000, $60,000 hedge. In doing so, one, opens education up to anybody who wants it, and your country is better off for it. The other one tries to find a way to make a buck for a 1%, and in doing so damages the entirety of the country. In doing so, when you were talking about the education facilities, the schools, the way that they did education in regards to making it free and open, that is not the way we do education here. Like the same way that they're doing AI, where they're like, we're going to spend a huge amount of money on it, we're going to fleece the public in order to use it, we're going to privatize it, so it is going to be corded off by a bunch of cops in order to prevent anybody from getting access to it. And the other group is like, it's free, everybody can have that, enjoy. Those are radically different ways of thinking, not just in the AI sense, but also in the education sense, meaning the means by which to get the AI. These are different things. These are
You're
very different
absolutely
things.
right. Yes. What you do is, do you enclose the means of production of knowledge, or do you open it up? Do you give
Right.
everybody the means of production of knowledge? And the Chinese response is clear. It's a socialist country, or aspiring to be socialist. They want win-win. You share it, everybody wins. And the guy who started this company, he said that we're not in it for the profit. He's saying we're charging a tiny amount that covers our costs, but we are not in this for the profits. We believe that our moat is doing good work that will attract good people, and that we give to society, as opposed to the U.S. mindset, which is zero sum. It's, if I don't get it, somebody else will. Therefore, I have to take as much of it as possible. It's really, it's open source versus closed source. It's win-win versus zero sum. And ultimately, it's the difference between a socialist conception of society versus a greed-mongering capitalist mindset. So, let's think a little bit about how most capitalist tech firms operate. The mythology is that they innovate, they create a better mousetrap, and then everybody flocks to them, and then they get rich, and then et cetera, right? And then if you're lucky, they do a little bit of philanthropy and toss out crumbs. What they really do, almost all of them, what they really do is they steal from the commons. Okay, they steal from that which exists in the commons, and then they enclose it and they make it proprietary, and they sell it back to you in shitified. And then what they do is they sue all their competitors, right? That is really the model of how most tech companies operate. It's true for Microsoft. They privatized stuff that was out in the, that was open source. It's true for, all of them are like that. And, for example, you look at the big, lawsuits, Google versus Oracle. Google developed Android using some Unix code that was considered to be in the public domain, and Oracle sued them for what, $8 billion, because they had bought Sun Microsystems and they claimed that it was their proprietary property. Or Apple suing Samsung because Samsung made a phone that was shaped like a rectangle, right? So this is what they do. I mean, they're not really, tech firms anymore. They're PR firms or law firms with a little tech, with a little IT department. And this is what they do: is they privatize, they steal the commons, they privatize it, they enclose it, they make it proprietary, and then they sue the hell out of all competitors. And it looks like that OpenAI, is gearing up for that too. It looks like, there's scuttlebutt that they're going to sue Deepseek. I wish them good luck on that.
Good luck with that. Yeah.
Right. I mean, they stole everything that they have, that they use to train their models on. But, this is, as you point out, it's the fundamental difference between a win-win, socialist mindset and this avaricious, greedy, zero-sum capitalist mindset. And we can see which is going to have, the greatest effect on society.
KJ, man, thank you for this. Yeah, I was fascinated by the story. I was fascinated. I mean, I did software engineering before I got into doing media. I was a software engineer for like 10 years. Some of the stuff I can wrap my head around, like in regards to, I can conceivably come up with a training mechanism where you're training a computer to do something over and over and over and over again, where it gets, it's like, okay, when you have success, give it a certain value, in which case at the end of the process, the computer is better at doing a particular thing. Okay, that's one thing. How they do the large language model stuff is fascinating to me. I have no idea how they do it.
Well, it's not that complex. It's just a brute force approach. They call them transformers, right? You take large data sets and then you train them to predict the next token or the next word. And it's literally, I went to the store, I went to the store to buy some. You can guess what that is. Statistically, if you have a large enough database, you can figure out what that next word is. And you do that over and over again. You train it over and over again using neural networks. And then you are able to generate, these entire strings or tokens. And that's why, GPT is generative, pre-trained transformer, right?
Oh, that's so much data. God, man, that's so much data. Because if you think about it, you would have to have, let's say, massive amounts of data. And within the context of the conversations that's associated with that data, you would have to do some kind of search to say, okay, what percentage is most likely to come up next based on all the information that we have available. And so you might have car 80%, Bob 10%. And based on that, you could say, okay, well, we think it's going to be car, in which case car comes up. But that requires a massive amount of data in order to make that work. But to your point, they train Deepseek to do that without having to go through all of that other process, effectively training it on these other larger language models.
Right.
No, man,
So
it's
there's
fascinating.
constant reinforcement of that process, which is, this is one of the hacks. The other thing is, I mean, if you think about it, AI boils down to two different things. One is a brute force approach, which is largely developed out of connectionism. It comes out of the 1960s perceptrons, which are designed to model, or it's a, kind of a simulation of how they think neurons work, and you just build connections that eventually get reinforced. And for that, you need, massive amounts of data that is continually reinforced through weights. The other system, or the other approach, which has, which was primary until the early 2000s, what is called the physical symbol systems hypothesis. That is, you represent some aspect of reality using a physical symbol or a token. You generate discrete rules, and then you have a limited, space, and then you determine what is the optimal pathway to reach your goals through that. I mean, best example is chess, right? You have these chess playing computers. Chess is discrete. The pieces are discrete. It's a limited, constrained field, and then what you can do is you can derive algorithms as well as heuristics that will put you in the best position. It's still incredibly computationally complex, but you can get quite far with that. But you don't get general intelligence, you don't get language processing, you don't get visual recognition, you don't get all the things that we would consider to be typical human common sense behaviors and capabilities. So for that, you need to go to large data sets using neural networks, machine learning. And when you do that, you don't quite know what you'll be getting. You'll get probabilistic results, but you don't know if those results are actually correct. So the best example of this is the French AI called Lucy. That thing is supposed to be a competitor to all the American and Chinese programs, but it's a complete mess. It can't do arithmetic. It quotes Hitler. It tells you how to make, illegal drugs. It's a complete mess. And the French say this, represents a European civilization. Yes, it does, but not in the way you think it does.
Yeah.
So there are many ways that this can go wrong. But if you do your engineering right, and you use, all these, skill techniques, mix of experts, reinforced learning, etc., then you have something that can work, which is incredibly powerful. The Chinese have shown proof of concept of this, and now people are taking their work and running with it. And they're going to show that it can be done by anybody. Like I said, this is the AK-47 of AI. It really is, groundbreaking.
Just fascinating. KJ, no. He is a journalist, political analyst, writer, and teacher specializing in the geopolitics of the Asia Pacific region. He was contributor to the book Capitalism on a Ventilator, once censored by Amazon. It is now available at iacenter.org. KJ, where can people find you, by the way? I should ask you before I let you go.
Yeah, they can go to the China Report on the Breakthrough News Network. I co-host a show with Amanda Yee, and we cover contemporary topics such as China, AI, and anything else that's relevant, primarily for, geopolitics in the current world that we live.
KJ, you should have told me that. I've had you on this show so many times, and I don't remember. To be fair, I should have just asked you, hey, where could people find you? And I would have found that out myself. Okay, Breakthrough News Network. And what was the name of the show again? The China Report?
The China Report.
Badass. Too modest, man. You got to be like, I don't mean to hold my own horn, but you can catch me at this particular location. No, but man, thank you for this. I really appreciate it, man. Be safe. Oh, by the way, what time does the China report come on?
It comes on every Tuesday in the afternoon.
Okay, badass. You have a good one, man. Be safe. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, KJ. Good.